Hi Booktube, it's Marianne at Readathon book, and today we are wrapping up the second half of January 2021. And oh, what a glorious month it has been. I have been basking in the glow of historical romance from the 15th onwards, apart from when I took a break to finish a book I'd already started. We took part in the historical romance readathon between the 15th and the 21st of January, and then just barreled on and continued reading historical romance till the end of the month. And the majority of books I've read in the past fortnight were either 4 or 5 star books, apart from one, so that's smashing. I was looking at my stats, I'll just put them here, and the average rating that I have on Goodreads this month is 3.8 something, so that's pretty good. Let's talk about the books, which is why we're here in the first place. So we're going to go chronologically. Let's get it done. So the first book I read in the second half of January was A Notorious Vow by Joanna Shupe. This was the group read for the historical romance readathon. I gave it 5 stars. Basic plot: Christina is taken to New York from London by her parents to marry her off to someone wealthy because the family have squandered away all of their fortune and are basically looking to use her as a cash cow. And the guy that she is supposed to be marrying, she meets him, he is absolutely horrific, doesn't have any respect for women whatsoever, he's just gross, and he is very invasive with Christina. We also have Oliver, who is deaf. He is quite reclusive. He's faced bullying and being ostracised within the general community because he is deaf, and he prefers to be at home alone, working on a hearing assistance device, and just can't be bothered with socialising. So Christina meets Oliver accidentally. There is a dog involved. It's adorable, and they get to know each other and build a wee friendship. And then Christina's mum finds the two of them together. He knows that they're trying to marry her off to Van Pete, and he's like, okay, I'll marry you, but we're going to be married in name only. It's just for a year. Nothing's going to happen between us. I don't have time in my life for a relationship. It's not going to happen. And she agrees to it. And so sparks a nice slow burn romance. There are no toxic elements to the relationship. Joanna Shupe explores the characters' upbringings and their experiences with bullying and how they're treated by their parents. There's discussion on how the hard of hearing were treated in the 19th century. We also have Oliver's cousin, who, again, like Christina's parents, is looking for money. It's a really nice slow burn romance that evolves naturally. They become friends and get to know each other first. There is no miscommunication. Christina appears, it's not explicitly stated. Reading between the lines, it looks as if there is an element of social anxiety there. So the two characters are perfect for each other. They don't want to be involved in like the social aspect in their 19th century lives. They just want to be alone, and then they end up being alone together. And it's a nice slow burn romance that is done really well. There is no unnecessary drama that isn't needed for the story. Oliver was very much the wholesome hero throughout the book. Christina was quite naive and came off as quite immature at times, but I was quite invested in the relationship anyway. The book was really well written. What I loved was the fact that Joanna Shupe had actually hired a sensitivity reader to read the book before being published to ensure that she hadn't misrepresented the deaf community, and she was very respectful in her portrayal in her book. So overall, I just loved the book. We had disability rep, we had no toxic relationships, we had a wholesome hero. So at that point I was literally like, right, we've started off on a high, but I peaked too soon. The second book I read during the readathon was Seducing the Sinful Duke by Lisa Campbell. So the characters of Jeremy and Helena are caught in a lover's tryst by her half-brother, who then forces them to marry. Jeremy doesn't want to marry her, she doesn't want to marry him. Your typical forced marriage situation. Helena annoyed me because for all she was being portrayed as a strong female character, she was incredibly naive. From the get-go, her brother was acting sketchy, and it's like there seemed to be something wrong there. Jeremy annoyed me because he just wasn't communicating whatsoever. I saw the plot twist coming a mile away. It was really transparent as it was unfolding. It just was really underwhelming for me. It just didn't do it for me whatsoever. I wasn't invested in the characters. I wasn't feeling any sort of chemistry in the relationship. As soon as I read this quote in the book, I thought that's pretty much sealed the deal for me. Jeremy uses the phrase, "You made me believe in love again." And I was just like, oh, I cannot. That is me. I am done. I was like, no, I don't stand. No thanks. Take it back. I kind of felt bad giving it 2 stars because it wasn't completely atrocious. It's just the way that I classify my star system. I didn't like it. The next book I read for the readathon was How to Fool a Duke by Mary Lancaster, and this one was a 3-star read. You have the characters of Leonard and Sarah. Leonard is a duke who spurns Sarah at the beginning of the book when she's a teenager, and she's really, really salty about it. And she ends up going to Lady Whitmore's castle, where any of the rejected or spurned girls go to improve themselves and their skills and their etiquette and all that sort of thing, so that they have a second chance at finding a marriage partner. Leonard is also invited to the castle to a charity event, conveniently, and she sees him and he sees her. He doesn't know who she is, she knows who he is, and she develops this plot to try and seduce him and then go, ha, pulled a little sneaky on you, it's me, you stood me up back in the day and I don't want you. But it ends up that the two of them fall in love. I would have quite liked to have seen the deception carried on a wee bit longer throughout the book, because they figured out who she was pretty quickly. But the advantage of that was the book was quite fast paced. There was no added drama that wasn't relevant to the plot. There was a certain aspect of the story that I would have loved to have seen explored in a wee bit more detail. It was a pleasant read. There was nothing about it that I can really criticise that much. Like I said, I just would have liked to have seen the deception carried out a wee bit longer. I would have liked to have seen certain aspects of the story kind of expanded on a wee bit. Now, the next book I read was A Governess Should Never Tempt a Prize Fighter by Emily Windsor. How have I missed out on Emily Windsor books up until this point? So I gave this book 5 stars because I absolutely adored it. There was nothing about this book whatsoever that I didn't like. I had absolutely 0 complaints. Matilda basically escapes the clutches of her cousin, and she applies to work as a governess for Seth, who's the owner of a boxing academy. During the interview, the two of them totally misjudge each other for who they are as people, but then they both kind of like rapidly come to realise, actually, wait a minute, we have completely misjudged each other. And then we have this gorgeous slow burn romance happen. He has a single dad. He needs someone to prepare his daughter for being a woman. The romance that blossoms between them is so non-problematic. It is so wholesome. They see completely different sides of each other. He's intelligent and he's wholesome and he's lovely. He's not your typical rakish male character who just wants to dip his wick in everything. She is a very strong character and she does things out with her comfort zone, like she goes to boxing matches with Seth. There's no unnecessary drama, there's no toxic behaviours exhibited by either party, and it had my favourite trope of 2 characters from different social classes coming together and having a relationship. The love scenes were written so well. Since then, I have read another 3 of her books, but we'll get to them in a second. The next book I read was My Fake Rake by Eva Lee. This is the first book in the Union of the Rakes series, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. It would have been a 5 out of 5, but I will explain why it was not in just a second. So, Grace and Sebastian, the 2 main characters, aren't your typical historical romance characters. They're both very bookish, very scholarly, and Grace is looking for a husband. She asks Sebastian, who is her close friend, to pose as a rake and pretend to be interested in her to make someone else jealous. So this other guy that she's trying to make jealous, she's like, oh, he's the perfect man for me. And then I, as a reader, I'm looking at it going, like, how can you not see that Sebastian is literally the perfect guy for you? Where are you getting your information from? What's going on there? What's good? Anyway, he goes along with it, and then the whole fake dating thing starts. So there's quite clearly a spark there, and they end up falling in love with one another, and that's when the story begins to fall apart. The reason that it wasn't a 5-star for me is because in this sheer level of miscommunication or lack thereof, it's constant. Like, even after the first time that they're intimate with each other, she's like, oh, like, we're just friends, and he's like, oh, we're just friends, yeah, totally same. And then like like, you've just shared this experience that was mind blowing, and I'm just gonna be like, yeah, cool, let's stay buds. It's just a shame because I love them as a couple. I love them as friends. I love the story in general. I love the concept. We had anxiety rep in there with Sebastian. We had a sort of Breakfast Club style beginning. It was a total she's all that vibe. The love scenes were written so well. Very spicy. Loved it. The lack of communication just became really tedious. After a while, oh, she doesn't love me, he could never love me, and it was just like blah 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 blah, and I was like, oh my god, can you please stop with your inner monologue and just speak to each other? It was driving me insane. I cannot handle the stress of watching this from an outsider's perspective. But like I said, aside from the miscommunication, it was perfect. I loved it. The miscommunication just lasted too long, and at one point I was just like ready to smash my head in the wall going, please will you just speak to each other. I'm really hoping that with the popularity of the Bridgerton series in Netflix that they're going to adapt some more historical romance books, and I would love to see My Fake Rake adapted, because you have the Breakfast Club sort of vibe with the guys at the beginning, and then you have the she's all that vibe where he's getting sort of made over to be this rakish type. I am totally here for that. 100%. Also, like, if you've read the book already, or if you're reading it or going to read it, when you get to the scene with the piggyback race, like, that was like one of my favourite scenes in the book. And then obviously the subsequent barn situation. So the next book I read was An Earl in Wolf's Clothing by Emily Windsor. This is the first book in the Rules of the Rogue series, and the story centres around the characters of Bram and Sophie. So Bram is a spy for the crown, which I love. I've never read a Regency spy novel, so I was interested in that sort of element being thrown into it. And I normally don't like the whole misunderstanding causing a breakup thing, like someone overhears something and they go, oh my god, or they just take a situation a certain way or see something happening and assume the worst. But because of the spy element being thrown in there, it adds substance to it. The whole he's a spy but he can't tell her because it puts her in danger. It's not just like he's been caught talking to somebody and then she's assumed that he's having an affair. Like, there's a genuine reason behind it, and it also means that they can include an element of action / suspense to it. Bram and Sophie were likeable characters. Admittedly, Sophie could be a wee bit self-centred, and Bram could come off a wee bit over amorous in his efforts to try and get her back, even though you completely understand why. Like, it's not his fault that she has taken it this way. Oh, for some context, Sophie and Bram a year previously were engaged to be married, but Sophie overhears something and assumes that he is having an affair and thinks badly of her, so she goes away to Ireland to sort of lick her wounds and go over her heartbreak, and then comes back to London again, and he's trying to get her back. Is still lying to her. He's not able to tell her that she is a spy in case it puts her in danger. You have that element of not being able to resolve the issue without creating a further conflict. So he has to take steps to be able to sort of work around that and then eventually communicate with her that he's a spy. Here's that Emily Windsor does have a certain fondness for writing strong female characters, because the two female characters in this, Sophie and her cousin Aideen, are both break away from the stereotypes of these fragile 19th century ladies and are very strong-willed. I absolutely loved Aideen, who is her cousin from Ireland, who is so cheeky and so rude, and she has these scathing comebacks and insults to anything anybody throws at her. I was slightly more invested in Aideen and the Duke, because I felt like those two had more of a chemistry, even though you only saw kind of small glimpses of their interactions. So I was kind of really itching to get forwards and get to the Duke and Aideen's story. But I really liked it, and I finished it thinking, right, I'm going to continue on with this series. The next book I read was Would I Lie to the Duke by Eva Lee, and this was a well-deserved 5-star read. I absolutely adored this book. This was the second book in the Union of the Rakes series, and it centres around the characters of Noel and Jess. Jess is actually a sort of farmer's daughter type. Her family owns a soap business, but unfortunately they fell upon hard times. They had a situation happen, so their business kind of like fell apart. To bring in money for the family, she ends up going and working as a lady's maid. The woman that she is lady's maid for ends up injuring herself and gets stuck in the country, so she is left at the house by herself and decides to pose as a member of the upper class to try and sort of really kind of showcase her family's company's soaps in the hopes that she'll get investors. So she's really intelligent, she knows a lot about business, knows a lot about finances. She manages to get involved in this gathering with these investors. Now, what I loved about the character here, even though her whole character is essentially built on a lie, Jessica shows remorse about the fact that she's lying. As she's building friendships and relationships, she does constantly feel guilty about it. So it's not one of those situations where the character is lying and just being selfish and they end up really unlikable. You genuinely do feel kind of sorry for her, because the situation that she's ended up in isn't her fault. And you also have Noel, who is the Duke, and he ends up speaking to her. They first meet prior to her masquerading as this lady, so they start building a friendship, and again she feels really guilty for lying to him. I love Noel's character in My Fake Rake, so I was looking forward to seeing where they were going to go with him in this story, and he reveals this more kind of vulnerable side. And again, this book also opens with the kind of Breakfast Club vibe, where he's kind of being humbled by the things that people are saying around about him. Like, he doesn't realise the privilege that he has with the money that he has and the opportunities he has. He also finds it quite hard to open up to people, so you get to see this lovely character development unfold throughout the book as he is able to open himself up to her and speak to her and communicate. There was genuinely nothing about this book that I didn't like. The character development in Jess as she discovers her strengths while also accepting that she can't do everything for everyone was wonderful. Both of them become secure in themselves whilst falling in love with each other. There were parts of this story that made me cry. It made me very emotional. There were also parts of this story that made me sweat. It was the first time in historical romance that I had came across a sexually submissive hero. The intimate scenes were intense, but very well written. So yeah, the sex scenes were outstanding. Loved it. It was perfect. It was perfect. I have absolutely zero complaints whatsoever. There wasn't any melodramatic drama that was unnecessary. Every character in the book had likable qualities. The ending was so wholesome from start to finish. I was invested in the story, I was invested in the relationship, and yeah, 5 out of 5. Loved it. So the next book I read was Let Sleeping Dukes Lie, which was the next book in the Rules of the Rogue series, and we have Alex and Aideen who share a passionate kiss at the end of an Earl in Wolf's Clothing. This book is set a year later. Alex has been back in the country for a few months, but he has not yet seen Nadine. They come across each other and share a passionate embrace, but unfortunately are caught by 3 people, and he instantly says, I'm going to marry her. But in his mind, even though they're married, he's going to keep her distance. He's going to keep his distance from her, doesn't want her to get hurt because of his line of work, even though she already knows what it is that he does. He can't just communicate with her and say, look, this is why I'm worried for your well-being, and then let her make the decision for herself. But instead he just keeps pushing her and pushing her and pushing her away by being so nasty and cruel. She has this strong, fierce character who is literally toe-to-toe with him at every turn. They have great banter between the two of them, and he's just such a dick. I love the dynamic of their chemistry, but I just wanted to strangle Alexander so much. In all, I was rooting for them as a couple. The book was incredibly steamy. Must say, was loving the whole angry passion thing happening, especially the scene we had in the hallway on the table. I was here for that. The last book that I finished in January was Marquess to a Flame by Emily Windsor, and this was a full-on 5-star. It was perfection. I love a reformed rake. So, Jack, your typical rake from the previous books in the Rules of the Rogue series, he has to go to Cornwall on a mission to extract information from a lady called Tamsin, who has been involved with the villain who has been on the run throughout the previous books. So it's been the same villain throughout. She has had an altercation with him, and she lost her voice and couldn't speak, and now they think that they can get her to talk, but they need Jack to kind of woo her and get her to talk. So the experience that she has with the villain has just left her lifeless and devoid of joy and just so unhappy, and her and Jack totally misjudge each other, particularly on her. She really thinks that he's just this kind of fashionable, rakish idiot, and then is swiftly proven wrong. I think it was in the previous book that we found out about his more kind of philanthropic ventures, like donating money and stuff like that. So we kind of had that basis, that kind of foundation, that we knew that he was actually quite a good person. So the two characters basically began to fall for each other, obviously. The character development in this book exceeded my expectations. Jack shows vulnerability. He becomes more kind of open, shows that he does have principles, that he's not willing to just go and seduce an innocent maiden, and he genuinely ends up caring for her. He is worthy of having love in his life. She develops a newfound sense of confidence and strength, and again she sees the beauty in herself and how worthy she is of love, and so perfect. He finally chucks his rules. The chemistry was there, the characters were there, the plot was there, the action was there. If I'm being perfectly honest, Jack's story was probably the one I was least looking forward to, and then it turned out to be my absolute favourite, and possibly my favourite book of the month. A Marquess to a Flame and Would I Lie to the Duke are my 2 favourite books this month, both excellent books that I would recommend that anybody who has any interest in historical romance goes and reads. One, I don't know how I managed to sleep in Emily Windsor, but oh my god, I am really enjoying her books. They are so good. I think I might have found my 2 new favourite historical romance authors. Both Emily Windsor and Eva Lee have written amazing books. Eva Lee is one of those authors that I had heard about but hadn't read any of her stuff yet. And Emily Windsor I literally found by chance when I was looking up books for the Historic Romance Readathon. So yeah, that's everything I read in the second half of this month. I know that this wrap up has been pretty low energy, but it's 2:30 in the morning. I don't know, I might refilm this tomorrow. I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, that's everything. So happy reading, stay safe, and I'll speak to you later. Bye!